for those of you who are joining us for the first time, our pulpit theme for this year 2025 is Navigating the Culture, Eschatology, and the End Times. We are doing a deep dive into the book of Daniel. Now, presently, we are at chapter 9 of the book of Daniel. In my previous sermon, we looked at the first part of chapter 9. We explore Daniel's prayer. It was quite a lengthy prayer. Now, Daniel fasted and prayed after he read Jeremiah's prophecy concerning Israel's captivity and exile in Babylon, and God's promise to restore Jerusalem and to bring them back to the land of Israel. Now, that year was sometime in 539 to 538 BC, in the first year of King Cyrus and King Darius' reign. The Medo-Persian Empire has just displaced the Babylonian Empire. Now, this was a momentous moment, not because a new empire had risen, but because it had been 69 years since the fall of Judah and Jerusalem and the exile of the Jews to Babylon. It was 1 year shy of the 70 years that was prophesied by the prophet Jeremiah. They were on the brink of the promised return. Daniel swung into action. He decided to fast and pray, seeking God to act according to his promise. So God responded to Daniel's prayer and supplication. He sent the angel Gabriel to deliver his answer to Daniel. And Daniel got more than he asked. Now, instead of answering Daniel's prayer directly, God revealed to him a broad sweep of Israel's prophetic destiny, stretching from his time to the time of the Messiah, and all the way to the end of this present age. Now, this prophecy is commonly known as Daniel's 70-week prophecy. Now, in giving this prophecy, God wanted Daniel and his compatriots to know that God was not finished with Israel and the Jews yet. From the prophecy, it could be inferred that Jeremiah's prophecies would be fulfilled. They would be freed from their captivity to Babylon. They'll be free to go back to their homeland. Jerusalem will be restored. The temple would be rebuilt. Now, there are more to the 70-week prophecy. Though given the prophecy, I don't think Daniel understood most of its meaning. He just had a sense of it. Now, this prophecy is given to Christians and the Jews, especially to us living in the terminal generation, at the end of this present age. Now, this is evidence by God telling Daniel at the end of chapter 12 to go his way, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end. So these words, all the prophecies recorded in the book of Daniel are really meant, or most of them are really meant for the end of this present age. We are in that generation. We are the Omega generation. We are standing at the threshold of the end of this present age. Now, as I say in my previous sermon, Daniel's 70-week prophecy is a very important prophecy. The reason, because it is key to the chronology of significant eschatological events and to the proper interpretation of many other eschatological passages in the Bible. Now, Daniel's 70-week prophecy is like the cornerstone pieces of a big and complicated jigsaw puzzle. With it, you get a good overview, eschatological perspective, which enables you to fit many other prophecies into the puzzle, to fit them together more easily. Without it, you risk groping in blindly and getting the big eschatological ideas wrong. Now, here are some of the big eschatological ideas that we get from Daniel's 70-week prophecy. The tribulation period will last for 7 years. We get the idea from this prophecy. The tribulation period will last for 7 years. Israel will be in the tribulation, and Israel will be in for a very terrible time in the second half of the tribulation. Now, the 7-year tribulation is meant for God to deal with the nation of Israel, to finally bring a Jewish remnant to salvation. The 7-year tribulation is not meant for the church. The 7-year tribulation is not meant for the church. In other words, the church will not go through the wrath and the judgments of God in the tribulation. So, Daniel's 70-week prophecy points to the case of a pre-tribulation rapture position. And finally, the Antichrist will desecrate God's temple and proclaim himself to be God in the middle of the tribulation. While Jesus in the Olivet Discourse and John in the book of Revelation spoke about these two events, we learn about the timing that this will happen in the middle of the tribulation from Daniel's 70-week prophecy. Now you can see why many prophecy scholars and Bible expositors consider this prophecy as one of the most significant end-time prophecies in the Bible. Okay, now let's turn to the text for today. I'm going to read from Daniel chapter 9, verses 20 to 27. Verses 20 all the way to the end in verse 27. While I was speaking and was praying and confessing my sin and the sins of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God on behalf of the holy mountain of my God, that is Jerusalem. While I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen before in a vision, came to me in swift flight at the end of the evening sacrifice. He came and said to me, Daniel, I've now come out to give you wisdom and understanding. At the beginning of your supplications, a word from the Lord went out, and I've come to declare it, for you are greatly beloved. So consider the word and understand the vision. So this is the 70-week prophecy. 70 weeks are decreed for your people and your holy city. 70 weeks are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. Know therefore and understand, from the time that the word went out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the time of an anointed prince, there shall be 7 weeks. And for 62 weeks it shall be built again with streets and moat, but in a troubled time. After the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. And the troops of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed. He shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half the week he shall make sacrifice and offering cease, and in their place shall be an abomination that desolates, until the decreed end is poured out upon the desolator. So you can see that God answered Daniel's prayer very, very quickly. Gabriel make an interesting point here. At the beginning of your supplication, a word went out. The word obviously is from God. The word went out, and I've come to declare it, for you are greatly beloved. Now it gives me the sense that God is really enthusiastic about prophecy. God is enthusiastic to send this prophetic prophetic destiny, this prophecy to Daniel, to reveal Israel's prophetic destiny to Daniel. Okay, God couldn't wait. He was waiting for somebody to pray, and Daniel prayed. And the moment Daniel prayed, God responded almost immediately. All right, God sent Gabriel to deliver this prophecy concerning the prophetic destiny of Israel to Daniel. Now, so far in the book of Daniel, the prophetic dream and visions relate primarily to the Gentile nations. Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the dazzling image in chapter 2 and Daniel's vision of the four beasts, 10 horns, and the little horn in chapter 7 are focused primarily on the Gentile nations that would dominate the world and the nation of Israel. So is Daniel's vision of the ram, the goat, the four horns, and the little horn in chapter 8. It focuses primarily on the Middle Persian Empire and the Greek Empire and its offshoots. Though the prophecy of the little horn reveals how it attacks God's people and temple. But as for Daniel's 70-week prophecy, it relates primarily to the nation of Israel. It focuses primarily on God's redemptive program for Israel. The focus is on the nation of Israel. Now, let us explore the 70-week prophecy. I'm going to divide this prophecy into two main parts. The purposes, first part, the purposes of the decreed 70 weeks. What is the purpose of this prophecy? So the first part will be the purposes of the decreed 70 weeks. And the second part will go into the unfolding of the 70-week prophecy. Okay, I'm going to unpack that, okay, passage, verses by verses, point by point. So first, the purposes of the decreed 70 weeks. Now, it is called the 70-week prophecy because God has decreed 70 weeks for His chosen people, the Jews, and for His holy city, Jerusalem. A time period of 70 weeks is assigned to Israel and Jerusalem. If we read verse 24 again, 70 weeks are decreed for your people and your holy city. Question: what do we understand by the term 70 weeks? Now, for your information, you don't find the word weeks in the original Hebrew text. Okay, what you have is the word sevens. All right? Instead of the word weeks, you have the word sevens. Seven in plural, seven with an S, sevens. So the literal translation, if the translator were to translate it literally, verse 24 of Daniel 9 will read like that: 70 sevens are decreed for your people. Instead of 70 weeks, 70 sevens are decreed for your people and your holy city. But somehow, for reasons unknown to me, the word weeks is used in all the translations that is commonly used. Whichever is the case, the 70 weeks doesn't represent 490 days. When you read 70 weeks, you take 70 times 7. What do we get? 490 days, right? But 70 weeks in this prophecy doesn't mean 490 days. Instead, the 70 week is understood to mean 70 weeks of years, or 70 sevens of years, which is 70 multiplied by 7, which is 490 years. Now, if you remember what I said in my previous sermon, in the Jewish calendar or biblical calendar, these are lunar years, where 1 year equals to 360 days. In our solar calendar that we use, 1 year is equivalent to 365 and a quarter day, right? But in the biblical or Jewish calendar, 1 year is equivalent to 360 days. So essentially, this is what God is saying. 70 weeks of years, or 490 lunar years, are decreed for the nation of Israel and the city of Jerusalem. The question is, for what purpose? What is God's purpose for decreeing 490 years for Israel and Jerusalem? Now, we don't have to speculate. We don't have to speculate because the reasons are provided for us at the beginning of this prophecy. We go to verse 24 again of Daniel chapter 9. 70 weeks are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish, what are the purposes? To finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. 6 purposes are explicitly stated at the beginning of the prophecies. Okay, let us go through each of these 6 purposes very briefly. The first purpose, 70 weeks are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression. Now, the word transgression means the sin of commission. It is an act of going against God or God's word. When you know something is prohibited by God and you still do it, you transgress the law. You transgress God's law. You transgress God's word. The first purpose of the decreed 70 weeks of years, is for Israel to finish the transgression. The idea here is to put an end to the rebellion against God. The idea here is for the nation of Israel to put an end to their rebellion against God. Israel is God's chosen nation. Israel is God's chosen people. It has a covenant with God. But due to their persistent rebellion, they have broken God's covenant with them. And as a result, they were evicted from the promised land on 2 occasions. On the first occasion, the exile lasted 70 years. Okay, we are familiar with that. And that's the reason why Daniel prayed after reading Jeremiah's prophecy that at the end of the 70th year, the captivity would end. And then there'll be the restoration for the city of Jerusalem. The second exile lasted more than 1,800 years. We'll talk more about that later. Though the Jews are back in their land and they have regained sovereignty over their land since 1948 by the grace of God, they are still in a state of apostasy and rebellion. They need to finish their transgression. They need to repent and accept Jesus as their Messiah. 70 weeks of years, or 490 years, have been decreed upon them, upon Israel, upon Jerusalem, to finish their transgression. Now we go to the second purpose. The second purpose, 70 weeks are decreed for your people and for your holy city to put an end to sin. The second purpose is to put an end to sin. The idea here is to remove sin out of the sight of God, to remove sin completely and to get right with God. It points to the redemptive work of our Lord Jesus Christ on the cross of Calvary. By his death and the shedding of blood, we receive the forgiveness of sin, and and as well as salvation. Sometimes in these 70 weeks of years, the Messiah will come. Sometime in these 70 weeks of years, the Messiah would come to accomplish his work of redemption and to put an end to sin. So that's the second purpose. Now we go to the third purpose. What is the third purpose? The third purpose, 70 weeks are decreed for your people and your holy city to atone for iniquity. To atone for iniquity. To atone for iniquity simply means to cover sin. The word atone means to cover. All right? It means to take away sins. It means to wipe away sin. That's not all. It also has the associated idea of reconciliation with God. That means to be reconciled back, to be reconciled to God. Not only the sin, not only to remove the sin, but also to be reconciled with God. So the associated idea involve reconciliation with God, restoration to holiness, and the reinstating of God's favor. Again, all these things are accomplished by Jesus on the cross of Calvary. Sometime in these 70 weeks of years, the Messiah will come to bring atonement to the people of Israel. The Messiah Jesus had come 2,000 years ago. Through his work on the cross, he had already provided for the atonement of sin. Now, it remains for Israel to believe in him and to embrace him as their Messiah. Now, for the last 2,000 years, while many Gentiles, many people from around the world have embraced and believed Jesus Christ, the Jews haven't done so. There are sprinkling of Jews here and there that have believed in Jesus. They are called the Messianic Jews. But by and large, most Jews, all right, most Jews in Israel and around the world have not believed and have not embraced Jesus as their Messiah. So the third purpose of the 70 weeks of years is for the Jews to recognize and to accept Jesus as their Messiah. It has not happened yet. Most Jews are secular. They are atheists. While a segment of them who are religious flatly reject Jesus as Messiah. But one day in the second half of the 7-year tribulation, they will believe and embrace Jesus as their Messiah. This will happen when the Antichrist persecutes the Jews and leads a multinational military force to invade the nation of Israel. According to the prophet Zechariah, 2/3 of the Israeli population will die. Only 1/3 will remain. Now, all these remnants will turn to Jesus, and so all Israel will be saved. That means all the remnants of Israel will be saved. The Apostle Paul talks about this in Romans chapter 12. All Israel will be saved. It's not the Israel that we see now, but it's the Israel in the aftermath of the war, aftermath of the Ezekiel 38-39 war, aftermath of the Armageddon and a series of war that will happen there. In the aftermath of that, one-third of the Israeli population will be left behind, and this 1/3 will embrace Jesus as their Messiah. So that's the third purpose. Now we go to the fourth purpose. The fourth purpose, 70 weeks are decreed for your people and your holy city to bring in everlasting righteousness. Now this refers to Christ's second coming, when he shall return to reign as a righteous king over all the earth in his millennial kingdom. This will take place at the end of the 70 weeks of years. For the first time in human history, the world will be ruled by a righteous and benevolent king. Righteousness and justice will be the order of the day during this 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ. Jeremiah 23, verses 5-6. The days are surely coming, says the Lord, when I will raise up for David a righteous branch, and he shall reign as king and deal wisely, and shall execute justice and righteousness in the land. In his days, Judah will be safe and Israel will live in safety. And this is the name by which he will be called. The Lord is our righteousness. The Lord is our righteousness. Jehovah Sikenu or Yahweh Sikenu. So that's the fourth purpose. Now we go to the fifth purpose. The fifth purpose, 70 weeks of years are decreed for your people and your holy city to seal vision and prophet. To seal vision and prophet. Now, this phrase, to seal vision and prophet, is better translated as to seal both vision and prophecy. You don't really understand when you read it as prophet, all right? You understand better when you say to seal both vision and prophecy. That is, by the end of the 70 weeks of years, all the visions and prophecies in the Bible will have already come to pass. All the promises of God concerning Israel and Jerusalem and the kingdom of God will have already come to pass. So, what you can see here is that God has set a timetable for a complete fulfillment of all prophetic visions and biblical prophecies. They will be fulfilled by the end of the 70 weeks of year. The 70 weeks of year, all right, from the time that is being specified in the prophecy until, and that will stretch all the way to the end of this present age. So that's the fifth purpose. Now we go to the sixth and the final purpose. 70 weeks of years are decreed for your people and your holy city to anoint a most holy place. The word most holy place here is literally the Holy of Holies. But it's used here to merely refer to the temple of God. Okay, to the place, to the temple, to that place where the presence of God and the name of God dwells. Now, during the millennial reign of Christ, a new temple will be built in the city of Jerusalem. Okay, now we are talking about the rebuilding of the third temple, right? Everybody is keenly watching for the rebuilding of the third temple. But this is the fourth temple. This is not the temple that will be built and will be functioning during the 7-year tribulation. This is the fourth temple, the millennial temple. Okay, it will be built during the 1,000-year reign of Christ. God showed the prophet Ezekiel a grand vision of this magnificent millennial temple. Ezekiel gave a very lengthy description of the millennial temple in Ezekiel chapter 40 to 48. That's how important it is. It took 9 chapters, all right, Ezekiel chapter 40 to 48 to describe this millennial temple. Can go back and read it. The temple will be more glorious. Can we show the picture of it? The temple, this is an artist's impression. All right, many people after reading the 9 chapters, okay, they conjure up an imagery of how it looked like. I think this is one of the best that I can find. So it just gives you an idea of how the millennial temple will look like. Now this temple will be more glorious than the temple that was built by King Solomon. The Shekinah glory of God will shine in this temple because of the presence of Christ. Christ will rule from Jerusalem, his throne in Jerusalem, and his presence will be in the temple. The Shekinah glory of God will reside in the temple. Now, based on the dimension given in Ezekiel's vision, this will be an enormous temple. It will be huge, much bigger than all the previous temples. So, these are the 6 purposes of the decree 70 weeks for Israel and Jerusalem. To finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal vision and prophecy, and finally, to anoint a most holy place. Now, this is an overview of God's plan, of God's redemptive plan for Israel and for the city of Jerusalem. So, first, the purposes of the 70 weeks of years. Second, the unfolding of the 70-week prophecy. Okay, now we are going to look at the 70-week prophecy, how it is going to unfold. So there are 4 stages in the unfolding of the 70-week prophecy. The first stage, we'll talk about the starting date. Second stage, the first 69 weeks of the 70 weeks. The third stage, the prophetic gap, and that is referring to the church age. And the fourth stage, the 70th week. Okay, we shall explore all these 4 stages, one stage at a time. Okay, you got to really pay attention. Okay, you got to pay attention. If you can't catch, go back and listen to the video sermon again. All right, you don't want to miss the explanation. All right, the detailed explanation of this prophecy, because it's very, very important for our study of eschatology. So the first stage, the starting date. The start date of the 70 weeks of years is important. It is critical to get the date right in order to ascertain the end of the 69 plus 62, that is 69 weeks of years. You get the beginning, then you can ascertain, all right, the end of the 69 weeks of years. So, what is the start date of the 70 weeks of years? What is the start date of the 70 weeks of years? For that, we look at verse 25. Know therefore and understand, from the time the word went out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. From the time the word or the decree went out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, until the time an anointed prince, there shall be 7 weeks, and then for 62 weeks it shall be built again with streets and moat, but in a troubled time. Let me read the first statement again. Know therefore and understand, from the time that the word went out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. So when is the start date of the 70 weeks of years? Can we put it up? When is the start date of the 70 weeks of years? The time that the decree went out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Now, when exactly is this day? When exactly is this day? We have a clue in the Bible, but not from the book of Daniel. We have to look at the other biblical books. Okay, let's look at the possibilities. Because if we go into the study of these 70-week prophecies, there are many, many different suggestions. Some of them are actually quite ridiculous. But anyway, I'm going to give to you some of the possibilities that are rational, but not actually the correct way to think about it. Okay, some point to 539 to 538 BC, when King Cyrus gave the decree allowing the Jews to return home from their Babylonian captivity. They assumed that once the Jews returned to Jerusalem, they started to rebuild the city of Jerusalem. But rebuilding didn't begin. Okay, after more than 100 years, after 80, 90 years, they didn't really build the city of Jerusalem. They built their own houses, but not the city. What's more important is that Cyrus' decree allowed the Jews to return home. It wasn't a decree to allow them, to permit them to rebuild the city and to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. So, 539 to 538 BC cannot be the start date of the 70 weeks of year. Very clearly, it cannot be. Then, there are those who say that it could be the year 520 BC. Why? Because that's the year the Jews started to rebuild the temple, which they completed 4 years later in 516 BC. The governor of that region sent a letter to King Darius asking if a decree had been given for the building or the rebuilding of the temple. Then King Darius replied, telling the governor, hey, look, don't stop the rebuilding, all right? It has been authorized. Let the Jews continue to rebuild their temple. But nothing is mentioned about rebuilding the walls or rebuilding the city of Jerusalem. Okay? So we read about all that in Exodus chapter 5. Again, there is no mention, okay, like what I just said, there is no mention of the restoration and rebuilding of Jerusalem. So, the year 520 cannot be the start date of the 70 weeks of years. Now, there are still other people that point to 457 BC, when King Artaxerxes sent the priests and scribes to Jerusalem to check on the temple and the worship services. Ezra was also given money from the king's treasury to buy animals and grains for sacrifice and vessels for use in the temple. So the king was very generous, all right, to the Jews. Only also concerned about the temple and the temple services. We read about all this in Ezra chapter 7. But 457 BC cannot be the start date of the 70 weeks of years because nothing is mentioned about restoring and rebuilding of the city of Jerusalem. There wasn't any decree to that effect. Now, I believe that the start date of the 70 weeks of years is 445 BC. The start date is 445 BC in the month of Nisan in the Jewish calendar. This is the year and month when King Artaxerxes Longimanus gave Nehemiah the decree. He actually gave a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Earlier, Nehemiah had received news that the city of Jerusalem was in a bad and terrible shape. We read this in Nehemiah chapter 1 verse 3. So these people that Nehemiah sought to get the news from concerning Jerusalem said this: the survivors there in the province who escaped captivity are in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gate have been destroyed by fire. It has been broken down for a long time. A long time. Nehemiah then appealed to King Artaxerxes to allow him to rebuild the wall and the gates of Jerusalem. Nehemiah 2:5. Chapter 2, verse 5. Then I, Nehemiah, said to the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor with you, I ask that you send me to Judah, to the city of my ancestors' graves, so that I may rebuild it. So that I may rebuild it. And guess what? King Artaxerxes granted Nehemiah his request. Question: when did this conversation between Nehemiah and King Artaxerxes take place? When was the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem given? You get the answer in verse 1 of Nehemiah chapter 2. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes. In the 20th of King Artaxerxes, in the month of Nisan. So King Artaxerxes ruled the Medo-Persian Empire from 465 BC to 425 BC. Therefore, the 20th year of his reign is 445 BC. He started ruling from 465 BC. And therefore, the 20th year of his reign is 445 BC. So now, we know the start date of the 70 weeks of years. The year is 445 BC, and the month is Nisan. However, we don't know the actual day. It could be the first day all the way to the 30th day. We don't know the actual day. But according to the Jewish Talmud, which is a collection of writings concerning religious and civil law, the Jewish civil and religious laws, the first day, according to the Talmud, the first day of the month of Nisan is the new year for the computation of the reign of kings. So when they put down in writing this king reign from when to when, they always use the 1st of Nisan as the start date. The coronation of the king may be in other months, but they always use the 1st of Nisan as that day, all right, concerning the starting date of the reign of the king. So we can take it that King Artaxerxes issued the decree to restore and rebuild the wall of Jerusalem on the 1st of Nisan in 445 BC. And the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, UK, computed 1st of Nisan 445 BC to be 14th of March 445 BC. 14th of March 445 BC. Okay, this is an important date. Hold that date at the back of our mind. We'll come back to it later. So, 4 stages. The first stage, the starting date, we have ascertained that. Second stage, the first 69 weeks. Can we put it up? The second stage, the first 69 weeks. Now that we have ascertained the start date of the 69 weeks of years, let's look at how the prophecy unfolds from there. We look at verses 25 and 26. Know therefore and understand, from the time that the word went out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the time of an anointed prince, there shall be 7 weeks, and for 62 weeks it shall be built again with streets and moat, but in a troubled time. After the 62 weeks, that means after 7 and after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. And the troops of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed. Now, earlier in the sermon, I explained that 70 weeks of years are equivalent to 490 years. 1 week equals to 7 years, and these are all lunar years. We are told in verse 25 that until the time of the anointed prince, there shall be 7 weeks, and after that, there is another 62 weeks. So there are 2 periods of time indicated here, 7 weeks and then 62 weeks, making a total of 69 weeks. Now, here's something that you want to know, all right, for information's sake. We don't know why that these 2 time periods are mentioned separately, except that the 62 weeks of years, during the 62 weeks of years, Jerusalem will go through a very troubled time. Otherwise, for the sake of this prophecy, all right, for the interest of this prophecy, we don't understand why there's a division of 7 weeks and then after that 62 weeks, okay? They could have simply put it as a total of 69 weeks. No Bible scholars and commentators can give a reason why 7 weeks and 62 weeks are mentioned differently, all right? If you find out the reason why, I'll be interested to know. Come and tell me, all right? Anytime, come and tell me. Now, from history, we know that Jerusalem indeed went through a troubled time during that 62 weeks of years. During this period of time, Jerusalem was occupied by Alexander the Great of Greece. After that, it was under the control of the Ptolemies of Egypt. After that, the Seleucids of Syria. And I've talked about this in an earlier sermon. During the reign of the Seleucid king, Antiochus Epiphanes, the Jews experienced a horrendous persecution. Antiochus desecrated the temple of God with the image of the Greek god Zeus and the sacrifice of pigs on the altar of burnt offerings. Both the Ptolemaic and Seleucid dynasties were carved out of Alexander the Great's Greek empire after his death. After that, in 63 BC, Jerusalem was occupied by the Romans. And we all know that Rome ruled all their provinces in a very harsh manner, exacting heavy taxations. And then the Romans also came down hard on numerous Jewish uprisings during this period. Indeed, these 62 weeks of years was a very troubled time. Now, going back to the 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So for simplicity's sake, we'll combine them together. 7 weeks, 62 weeks, you add them together, what do we get? 69 weeks of years. Okay? How many years is that? 69 multiplied by 7, 483 years. There are 483 years in the 69 weeks. Now remember, these are lunar years, meaning to say 1 year equals to 360 days, according to the Jewish or biblical calendar. Now, according to the prophecy, after the 69 weeks of years, of 483 years, let me go back, okay? Let me go back. So, 483 years, okay? These are lunar years. So, 483 lunar years equal to how many days? If you multiply by 360, you get 880,000 days. Now, according to this prophecy, 69 weeks of years, or 483 years, or 173,880 days. After these years and days, the anointed one will be cut off and he will have nothing. Who is the anointed one? This morning we sang. The anointed one is referring to the Messiah. Is referring to our Lord Jesus Christ. So he will be cut off and have nothing after 69 weeks of years. After 183,700, did I get it right? 173,880 days. When will this be? When is the end of the 69 weeks? When will this be? What is the date? Now, adding the 173,880 days to the 14th of March, 445. Can you remember why it's 14th of March, 445? The beginning, all right, when the decree went out for the rebuilding of the wall. That means the start date of the 69 weeks of years. So adding the 173,880 days to the 14th of March, 445 BC, we get a date 6 April, AD 32, which is the 10th of Nisan on the Jewish calendar. This is the date when the anointed one, when the Messiah will be cut off. So 10th of Nisan or 6th of April, AD 32 is or happened to be the Palm Sunday. It happened to be the Palm Sunday. You remember what happened during the Palm Sunday? Jesus rode on the young of the donkey in the triumphal entry into Jerusalem to offer himself as the Messiah to the nation of Israel. But sadly, the leaders and many ordinary people rejected him. His disciples a few days later also abandoned him. Peter denied him 3 times. And then Pontius Pilate sentenced him to death barely 5 days later. And Jesus was crucified on the cross. Jesus was cut off and have nothing. Jesus was cut off and have nothing. Can you see how amazing the prophecy is? Giving you the specific dates. From the beginning, the start date from the start date of the 69 weeks, from the decree to rebuild the walls in Jerusalem. 69 weeks later, okay, on that Palm Sunday, on the 10th of Nisan, the anointed one will be cut off. He was officially rejected on Palm Sunday. Now let's look at verse 26 again. After the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. Let's focus on the second part now. And the troops of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. desolations are decreed. Another significant event happened at the end of the 69 weeks, 7 plus 62, 69 weeks of years. And the troops of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed. And again, let me tell you that this prophecy is fulfilled to its details. Now, one of the worst Jewish uprising happened in the year AD 70. And to put down that uprising, General Titus led a formidable army of the Romans to brutally crush the revolt. More than 1 million Jews were killed. And the temple of God was razed to the ground a second time. More than 1 million Jews were killed, and the temple was razed to the ground. In the prophetic words of Jesus, not one stone shall be on another. That is what Jesus prophesied at the beginning of his Olivet discourse. It was fulfilled in the year AD 70. Now, despite the utter defeat, there was continual smaller scale uprisings or insurrections. Finally, the Romans had enough of the Jews. So in 135 or in AD 135, they expelled all the Jews from the promised land. They expelled all the Jews from the promised land. Indeed, the end of Jerusalem came with a flood. Okay, it's a picture of the utter devastation that was so horrendous and so total. In the next 18 centuries, until 1948, the land was generally sparsely populated. The divinely decreed desolations happened as prophesied. Now, Jerusalem has always been bustling with activities. But since AD 135, for the next 1,800 years, it lay desolate. There are people living there, but very sparsely populated. So after the 69 weeks of years, Messiah was cut off. Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed. The land lay desolate for many, many years, for nearly 2 millennia. How amazing is this prophecy? The way it is being fulfilled. Okay, not only the events are prophesied, but also the timing. It is uncanny. It is really uncanny. Now, one of the things that we can learn is this. Okay, a lot of prophecies in regard to the nation of Israel, dates are given. You can do a lot of calculation with it. But with the church, it always remains a mystery. We don't know the timing. Okay, like the rapture, we don't know the timing. Okay, but things relating to Israel, sometimes timing are given. Precise timing are given. Okay, so the first stage, the starting date. Second stage, the first 69 weeks. The third stage, the prophetic gap, or what we call the church age. Now, after 69 weeks of years, 1 week is remaining, right? It is a 70 weeks prophecy, right? 69 weeks have been completed. There is still 1 remaining year. What is the prophecy for the 70th year? What is going to happen in the final week of the 70 weeks of years? We look at verse 27. Verse 27 reads, "He shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half a week he shall make sacrifice and offering cease, and in their place shall be an abomination that desolates, until the decreed end is poured out upon the desolator." Now, for those of you who have been following the series very attentively, chapter by chapter, okay, let me ask you this question. Does this sound like the prophecy given in Daniel's vision of the little horn in Daniel chapter 8? It sounds quite alike, right? About the abomination of desolation, the sacrilege that desolate. Okay, it sounds like that. Let's look at, to refresh you, look at Daniel chapter 8, verse 13. Just read one verse there. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one that spoke, "For how long is this vision concerning the regular offering, the transgression that makes desolate, the abomination of desolation, and the giving over of the sanctuary and host to be trampled?" Now this prophecy in Daniel chapter 8 was fulfilled in the person of the Seleucid king Antiochus Epiphanes. Remember? I hope you remember. I mentioned what he did earlier, and also in that sermon, he put up an idol of the Greek chief god Zeus. All right, in the holy place, and then he also sacrificed pigs on the altar of burnt offering, thereby desecrating the altar and desecrating the temple. So Antiochus Epiphanes is the transgression that makes desolate, or many other translations put it as the abomination of desolation. But this event had already happened during the 69 weeks of years. This event had already been fulfilled in the 69 weeks of year. So why is it in verse 27, it says that there shall be an abomination that desolates in the 70th week? Why did he say that in the 70th week, this abomination of desolation will happen again? The answer is very simple. Because a similar event will happen sometime in the future. A similar event, not exactly the same, but a similar event will happen sometime in the future on the 70th week. There will be another anti-God-like figure, an anti-God figure like Antiochus Epiphanes, appearing during the 70th week, and he will desecrate God's temple like what Antiochus did. And I told you in that particular sermon that anti-God figure is the Antichrist. He is the Antichrist. Antiochus Epiphanes is a type of the Antichrist. He has the Antichrist spirit, and what he did, the Antichrist will do similar things. Now, important question. Has this event mentioned in verse 27 happened yet? Has it happened yet? Has the Antichrist appeared yet? No, the answer is absolutely no. In other words, the 70th week, the final week of years, has not happened yet. The 70th week has not happened yet. Well, it is supposed to follow immediately after the 69 weeks, right? I mean, you count 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks until 69. Then after that is the 70th week. But it is missing. Why? What happened? Is it because the prophecy was inaccurate? It was accurate until the 69 weeks, and then after that, it becomes inaccurate. God got it wrong. Daniel got it wrong. Of course not. The events in the 69 weeks of years and immediately after the 69 weeks of years have been fulfilled beautifully and precisely. So you can expect what was prophesied to happen in the 70th week will also come to pass, just that it had not happened yet. So the events of this 70th week, of final 7 years, awaits fulfillment in the future. In other words, there is a break, there is a gap in Daniel's 70th week prophecy. It happens between the 69th week and the 70th week. So if I were to present this pictorially, it will look something like that. Okay, if it's too small for you to see, the insert is given in your bulletin. Okay, it is found in your bulletin. You can pull it out and you can take a look at it. So in the chart here, or in the diagram here, you can see the start date of the 70 weeks of years begin with the decree to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem. Then that will be followed by 7 years 7 weeks of years, that is 49 years, and after that, 62 weeks of years, that is another 434 years altogether. 62 plus 7, you get 483 years. After that, there is a prophetic gap. Can you see in the diagram? There is a prophetic gap. And after the prophetic gap, the 70th week, that is the final 7 days. We'll talk about the 70th week in my next point. Now let's focus on the prophetic gap. Remember what I say remember what I said earlier in the sermon. Daniel's 70-week prophecy reveals the prophetic destiny for the nation of Israel. So it is all about Israel. But after the 69 weeks of years, the prophetic time clock for Israel suddenly stopped ticking. It came to a grinding halt. The 70th week of years is suspended indefinitely. We don't know for how long. In a sense, and prophetically speaking, Israel disappeared from the scene, and the church of Jesus Christ emerged and took center stage since then until today. Now, this period of the prophetic gap is commonly known as the church age. We are living in the church age in the last 2,000 years. Daniel was not told about this prophetic gap, so Daniel didn't have any idea about it. Neither Daniel nor the prophets in the Old Testament nor the rabbis, nobody understand about this prophetic gap. Okay, nobody foresee the church age. Surprise? There are mysteries in the Bible, all right? Surprise? Are you surprised to hear that? Now, you and I should be surprised because the Apostle Paul talks extensively about the mystery of the church. The church is a mystery. The church is a mystery. Paul expounded on the mystery of the church, of the mystery of the Gentiles sharing in the inheritance together with the Jewish people. All right, in Ephesians chapter 3. Go back and read Ephesians chapter 3. Now, here's an important question. Is God done with the nation of Israel and the Jews yet? Is God done with Israel and the Jews yet? And the answer is no. Okay, one way to reply that is this. There is still one final week of 7 years remaining for God to deal with the Jews. For them to what? To finish transgression, to bring an end to sin, to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophecy, and to anoint a most holy place. God's 70 week of years is his redemptive plan for Israel, and it is not completed as yet. 69 weeks of years have been completed. There's still one more week. God hasn't brought his dealing with Israel to a completion yet. There is still one more year. So, question is, when will God resume his redemptive work with Israel and the Jews? When will the prophetic clock for Israel start ticking again? When will the 70 week happen? When will it begin? The Apostle Paul gave the answer in Romans chapter 11, verses 25 to 26. Listen carefully. Paul says, I want you to understand this mystery. All right, this again is a mystery. That's why there's so much confusion. A hardening has come upon part of Israel until the full numbers of the Gentiles has come in. And so all Israel will be saved. Why is there a gap? The gap is provided, okay, so that Gentiles can come into the kingdom of God. And the program, the redemptive program with the Jews will not start until the full number of Gentiles have come in. So when the full number of Gentiles have come into the church, God will then start working on Israel again to save the Jews. So, when will the 70th week start? When will the final 7 years begin? You want to answer? When the church is raptured. When the church is being taken out of this world. And then God's program with the Jews will once again restart. The 70th week will come back into play. Now, this is a strong case for the pre-tribulation rapture position. Remember, this is a significant prophecy. It is one of those cornerstone eschatological prophecy. Okay? The last week, the last 7 years got nothing to do with the church. It got everything to do with the nation of Israel. So from Daniel's 70-week prophecy, we learned that God's redemptive program and timeline for Israel and the church is separate. It runs on different track. Okay, what is the same is that both Jews and Gentiles, for them to be saved, they need to acknowledge Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. But God's redemptive program on the macro scale is different for the Jews and for the church. So the first stage, the starting date of the 70 weeks of years. Second stage, the first 69 weeks of years. The third stage, the prophetic gap, the church age. The fourth stage, the 70th week. So, after the prophetic gap comes the 70th week. After the church has been raptured, God will start dealing with Israel and the Jews again. And that's what the book of Revelation is all about. Chapter 6 onward, it is all the way to 19, it is all about Israel. Or the wrath, or the judgment, or the tribulation is all about God's dealing with Israel and the unrepentant world. Question: what is going to happen during the 70th week? For that, we look at verse 27. Okay, it reads, "He," referring to the Antichrist, "shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week. And then for half the week, he shall make sacrifice and offering cease. And in their place shall be an abomination that desolates until the decree end is poured out upon the desolator." That is the Antichrist. I want you to take note of three things here. The "he" in this passage refers to the Antichrist. Second thing, the Antichrist shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and then for half a week he shall make sacrifice and offering cease. So how long is 1 week? 7 years. Okay? 1 week is 7 years. How long is half a week? 3.5 years. Okay? That is 3.5 years. Now all these things that is mentioned in verse 27 will happen during the last 1 week, during the 70th week, during the last 7 years of the end of this present age. Third thing, this 70th week of 7 years is the final 7 years of this present age. Christ's redemptive program for Israel and for the world will come to a close, and a new age where Jesus will rule as king over all the world will begin shortly afterward. The final 7-year period is commonly known as the tribulation. This is where we get the idea that the tribulation will last for 7 years. I mean, you hear a lot of people saying that tribulation will last for 7 years. Can you find that in the book of Revelation? No, you can't find it. This is where you get it. This is a cornerstone verse. It's where you find, and this is where it says that the church is not involved, where only the nation of Israel is involved. So Daniel 9:27 is where we get the idea that the tribulation will last for 7 years. During this period, God will unleash his wrath and judge 3 categories of people. Not the church has been raptured. He will unleash his wrath and judge 3 categories of people. The first category, the unrepentant sinners. The second category, the nations. the nations. He will bring the nations. He will gather the nations to the valley of Jehoshaphat. And there, all right, to the valley of Hinnom, Jehoshaphat, and there judge the nation. The third group, the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel. So back to the question, what is going to happen during the 7th year? The Antichrist will do two things, as disclosed in verse 27. First, the Antichrist will make a strong covenant with many for 1 week. He will make a strong, that means a solid covenant, ironclad covenant with many for 1 week. That is, the Antichrist will make a covenant with many for 7 years. Most Bible scholars and prophecy experts believe that this is a peace treaty between Israel and its enemies. Now, Israel has many enemies. You realize that in every United Nations gathering, Israel has many enemies, especially the neighboring Arab neighbors that surrounds them, and those further away like Iran and Turkey. They hate Israel. And then increasingly, more countries are turning against Israel. Even the traditional allies of Israel, the Western European nations like Spain, France, and the United Kingdom. Okay? France is pushing to recognize, or they have already officially recognized the state of Palestine. UK threatened to do that until Donald Trump steps in. All right? So my point is that Israel has many enemies. Now, so far, since Israel's rebirth as a sovereign nation in 1948, no politicians, including the American presidents, are able to successfully broker a lasting peace between Israel and their Arab neighbors. Some of you may say, hey, look, well, there are peace treaty between Jordan, Israel, Egypt, Israel. But then you realize that even with these peace treaties, they are quite suspicious and they remain unfriendly towards Israel. All right? Now, having said that, where nobody succeeded, the Antichrist will succeed in doing that. The Antichrist will be able to forge a comprehensive peace agreement between Israel and its neighbors. Right? It will be a strong covenant. And this will happen at the beginning of the 70th week. At the beginning of the 70th week. You read that in Revelation chapter 6. When the first seal is opened, a white horse is released. And the rider mount on the white horse, it has no sword, it conquered by peace. That is the peace agreement that is mentioned there. So first, the Antichrist will make a strong covenant with many for 1 week. Second, the Antichrist will later break his covenant with Israel. Let's read verse 27 again. He shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall make sacrifice, and offering cease, and in their place shall be an abomination that desolates, until the decreed end is poured out upon the desolator. So at the beginning of the second half of the 7-year tribulation, the Antichrist will begin to do the same things, similar things as Antiochus Epiphanes. He will stop the sacrifices and offering in the temple. He will make it illegal for the religious Jews to do that. He will put up an abomination that desolates in the temple. That is, he will desecrate the temple. Jesus talked about this abomination of desolation. Okay, so you know that this is going to happen. He talked about it in the Olivet Discourse. Matthew 24 verse 15. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel. So the reference is back to the prophet Daniel. Okay, we can be absolutely sure that this event will happen. So while Antiochus Epiphanes put up an idol of Zeus in the temple and sacrifice pigs on the altar of burnt offering, the Antichrist will put up his own image in the temple. And Revelation chapter 13 tells us that the image can talk. It's been given life. Supernatural. I don't believe it's AI. All right? It's been given life. Okay? Supernaturally. And then, in the temple, at this midpoint, at this half a week, at this midpoint of the 7-year tribulation, he will proclaim himself to be God. He will proclaim himself to be God. He will force the Jews and the world to worship him. Anyone who refuses to do so will be killed. You read about this in Revelation chapter 13. Most people will submit to the Antichrist and worship him out of fear. But many Jews will refuse to bow to his threat. They will resist him. In anger, he will unleash his wrath on Israel. He will persecute the Jews. He will mobilize a multinational military force to invade Israel. Many Jews will be killed. And I've said that earlier. According to the prophet Zechariah, 2/3 of the Israeli population will be decimated. 2/3. What is the population inside there now? 10 million. Maybe 2 million Arabs, 8 million Jews. 2/3 will be decimated. Only 1/3 will remain. About 3 million will remain. And through the fiery trials, this remnant will turn to Jesus and embrace him as their Messiah, fulfilling the purposes of Daniel's 70-week prophecy. After 3.5 years of literal hell, the decree end is poured out upon the desolator, as Daniel said. Now we know from Zechariah chapter 14 and Revelation chapter 19 that Christ will return with his heavenly hosts and the raptured saints to defeat Satan and the Antichrist. It has been a pretty long and tedious sermon. Let me end today's sermon by showing you the pictorial representation of the 70-week prophecy again, and very quickly summarize it in a few words. The 70 weeks of years begin on the 1st of Nisan, 445 BC. That is 14th of March, 445 BC. Then 69 weeks of years later, or 483 biblical years later, Jesus entered Jerusalem in his triumphal entry to offer himself as Israel's Messiah. But he was rejected. He was cut off. That day is the 10th of Nisan, AD 32, or 6th of April, AD 32. Then came the prophetic gap. The prophetic time clock for Israel stopped ticking. After the 69 weeks, God's dealing with Israel halted. The 70th week was suspended indefinitely. And this is the beginning of the church age. And we are in the church age right now. When will it end? We don't know exactly because the timing is not given. It is a mystery. As the church is a mystery, the rapture is also a mystery. At the end of the church age, the church will be raptured. It will be taken out of the earth. Then, the prophetic time clock for Israel will resume. The 70th week will kick in. This is the 7-year tribulation. God will deal with Israel again, and through a series of fiery trials and tribulation, especially in the last 3.5 years, all the remnants of Israel will be saved. Then Jesus will return. This is his glorious appearing. He comes to defeat Satan. He comes to defeat the Antichrist. Now this is Daniel's 70-week prophecy. This is God's prophetic destiny for Israel. This is God's redemptive program for Israel. Let us stand.